So, hi everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at this session on Going Global. I think the first question to ask is, why is that important? And it might seem obvious, but actually we can actually answer that question with some numbers that we know about the sector in Australia. So, going back to the 2021 FinTech census, we actually know that 40% of Australian FinTechs earn international revenue. About half have an international presence, but fully 70% are intending to expand into at least one new international market over the next couple of years. So clearly it's really critical to understand how to execute on those international opportunities. And we're really lucky to be joined today by three really experienced leaders from Australian FinTech businesses that have shown strong international success. So a really great opportunity to learn from their experience, their understanding, and their insights. We will also, if you'd like, think about if you have any questions. We will have a bit of time for questions at the end. If you like, just put your hand up when we get to that. First to introduce myself, my name's Andrew. I'm from Austrade. I'm responsible for the support that we provide to businesses in the tech sector when they go global. I'd also like to really one of the things that's most important for this sector is the partnership we built with FinTech Australia. What that in practice means is bringing together the best of our resources and FinTech Australia's resources when we're helping Australian FinTechs to go overseas. So just thanks to FinTech Australia for the team for the conference that they've put on. And also for it's been a few years since everyone has been able to get together in this way. So thanks very much to the team from FinTech Australia. So time for introductions. I'm going to go first to each panellist, once in turn, and then we'll have the questions of all the panel. First is Gordon. So this is Gordon Campbell. He's from Rich Data Co. So Gordon is the Chief Product Officer and Head of Strategy, but he's also a 30-year software veteran with roles covering architecture, design, and product management, and onto the customer side. And most recently, before his current role, was an industry director at Oracle. First question to you, Gordon. Please just first tell us about Rich Data Co.
Thanks, Andrew. So Rich Data Co, RDC as we refer to it, is a company that's trying to drive inclusion in the credit cycle, and we do that using AI and data on our RDC platform, which is an AI-based decisioning platform. We started our journey 7 years ago in Sydney, and we have representation in Singapore, but also now looking to expand into the US. We've been looking a lot at mixing research and driving organic research in an R&D sense in the AI domain, and working with the universities in Sydney at this stage, and bringing that into a productized form to take into market. For us, it's a lot about how we can help people who are kind of unknown primes, banks kind of traditionally, and lenders traditionally can't evaluate people that don't have a credit history or credit file of any significance. So by using AI techniques, using the new data sets that we have available, we're able to bring better understanding of the potential health of that borrower, and then be able to potentially make a decision to lend or not lend, as the case may be.
And tell us about what was the experience expanding internationally, maybe particularly your experience in the US.
Yeah, this is actually our second entry into the US. We started a little while ago initially by putting somebody on the ground, and probably we're very underprepared, but we decided to go to the US in a much more structured way this year. We looked at the market here. If you read the numbers, we've got 5 major banks, but actually in raw number terms, we've got just over 50 banks that are operational. In the US, we look at it as 4,400 operational banks. It's obviously a scale decision for us to head off to the US. And with the US market, it's obviously got a range from very, very small, very regional banks all the way up to the big guys. And the 5 banks we have here all would appear in the top 10 in the US. And so really, for us, it's about targeting that top 100 banks and using the evidence of our success here, where we've worked with 2 of the majors already, be able to translate that into the US market.
Just when do you think is the right time to grow staff when you're in a new market?
Yeah, it's a tough question about onboarding people. We think this time we have chosen to go to the US with a partner so that we don't have to put boots on the ground in every role in the organisation. So we're using a distribution model which will be resale-led. That way we can bring our expertise, but in terms of talking to customers and engaging with customers, we've got a sales force and an existing potential commercial relationship with those customers, so it takes a lot of the administration side away from us.
Fantastic, thanks Gordon. I'll next move to Victoria. So Victoria is the COO of Miko, has actually a long international career in the technology sector, and was previously the Chief Strategy Officer of the Australian Payments Network. First maybe Victoria, let us know about Miko.
So the original idea for Miko was to give people tools to be able to control their own data. So you have to flip back 10 years before everyone understood that it wasn't good for Facebook to monetize your data and not tell you they were doing it. And Katrina Dow, the founder, had this idea that it would be better if people had control of their own data. Now that concept is really familiar to people. There was a report from Capgemini that came out 2 days ago that is talking about organisations need to have this hive mind and this fishbowl mentality, and that if you create transparency and collaboration, people share more data and you get better results for the customer and for the enterprise. But this was all before that. So Katrina had this idea that people should have control over their data. In the intervening 10 years, what we've done is pivot to sell tools to enterprise customers. And so we're present in Belgium, and just picking up on the sort of when do you go overseas, we started in the European market because it's that much more advanced in terms of data privacy. So GDPR meant that a whole host of organizations were thinking very carefully about how they use data. And it's not just the regulation, it's the impact of that regulation. So if you look at the organizations that have been fined as a result of GDPR, Meta is there twice, Amazon, Google, that's just in the top 6 list. So what that means is that other organizations looking at data like banks and government have to think about it differently. So it's the existence of the regulation and what organizations do as a result of that.
So it's a really interesting point. I think that traditional view of businesses going global is you start in Australia, you exhaust the Australian market, and then you go further. You have grown globally before really Australia is so much of a relevant market for you. So what was that like in terms of planning where to go, how to prioritise, and your experience as a different kind of scaling business?
It's a really good question, because the plan wasn't let's go to Belgium. So the plan, I guess, like many companies that come out of Australia, was choose an English language market. I have to say that language barrier is real. We now have Belgian engineers and Belgian account managers, because although the whole world does speak English, they don't want to. They don't want to have beer conversations in English, so we had to build on Belgian speakers. But the first step we took was to go to the UK, and there were a number of things that we got out of that. We joined in some of the accelerator programs with Visa and MasterCard, and that really helped us hone our ideas about what are the business problems and what tools do organisations need to solve those business problems. And then it was through that we sort of transitioned over to Belgium. But we got a lot out of being in the UK early, then we transitioned to Belgium, and then recently, I think probably similar to Gordon's story, we put someone back into the UK, probably a bit early. And I don't know if anyone listens to the Starting Greatness podcast, and Mark Leslie appears on there quite often, and he has this great thesis around the types of salesperson, people that you need, and it starts talking about Renaissance salespeople, and I think for a startup in the initial phases, you need that Renaissance salesperson who can service remotely, and then build out from there. So we probably put someone in a little bit early, but going there in the first place gave us the stepping stone into Belgium.
Fantastic, thank you. Over to Rimal. So this is Rimal Gurkani. He's the Chief Commercial Officer of Zai. He was actually founding co-chief executive officer, and also has a really extensive background in financial services across London and Europe. Formerly the executive director at Standard Chartered's SC Ventures in Singapore. Rimal, so Zai, from founding to 8 markets in 7 years. Tell us about it.
Sure. So Zai is a global payment orchestration platform founded in Australia several years ago. We now operate in 8 countries, around 275 people. We focus on providing payment solutions for digital native businesses. So it's a full stack payment offering from onboarding to payment in, payment out, reconciliation and reporting. We've focused a lot on the domestic market over the past several years, and more recently have gone on a global expansion, now offering solutions for corporates here and abroad, moving money around the world. We've gone through different ways of growing. So we've gone through organic growth over the past few years. We've also gone through inorganic growth to accelerate our capability in new markets. Given the cost and time of regulation and licenses, inorganic growth has been a really positive journey for us as we expand into new markets.
And I think we know from Austrade that quite a lot of companies go to the US, to the UK, to New Zealand, and to some extent to Singapore. They're probably the big 4. I think from talking with you, possibly have a bigger focus on Southeast Asia than some other fintechs out there in the community. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, when we looking at expanding new markets, I essentially followed the data. Outside of India and China, you still have 65% of Asia that is unbanked. It's a $1.7 trillion payment flow within Southeast Asia. There was $15 billion of new investment into fintechs just last year, which is a 50% increase from the year before. So it's a great market. It's a great, Southeast Asia, great region for companies to expand into. Very digital economies, young economies, tech savvy, and they are experiencing the same problems that many markets experienced probably 2 to 3 years ago. So it's a great platform for people to expand into. I think it at times can be easier to go to the US and to the UK, but we took a conscious decision to go into Southeast Asia to try and exploit some of those challenges that exist.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's have a think about questions from the floor. So get the hands up if you have any questions. Have a think about it. I'll do one more question to the panel, and then we'll pass the microphone around. Just hands up if you do. Question from me to everyone, and someone can jump in. So when you are going about the business of establishing and scaling new markets, what are the kind of resources that you think it's important to draw on that perhaps not everyone does in your experience? And who'd like to jump in first?
I'll jump in. We had some very good advice very early on, which said, pay for good advice. And I think we've done that all the way along. Good legal advice, good accounting advice, and a lot of good advice sourced from our network. I think, events like this where you talk to people about their experiences, it is essential and valuable. The other one that and this is a shameless plug, but the other one that we didn't really understand for a little while was what Austrade could do for us. It was 50s in the bank. But it really was a surprise to us of the kind of resources we had available. We got some reports on the North American market that were very insightful, and then specifically just this year, the market immersion in North America was a great chance to validate our thoughts and see firsthand some of the things that were being presented at Lend It conference. So yeah, we certainly kind of appreciate that alongside of all the other kind of sources of information we've used.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think there were introductions really matters, and we found that really helpful with Austrade. So Miko was part of the UK FinTech Bridge and got practical sort of qualified introductions to banks, which is invaluable. And picking up on Gordon's point as well, resources, we look at 4 things in a market. We look at the regulation, we look at the pace of innovation, so are banks or governments moving in this space. We also look at consumer appetite and the ease of remote servicing. And I think that Austrade produces reports that can give you a lot of information on that. So I think understanding the market, I think your point was follow the data. I completely agree.
You're not allowed to say Austrade.
I'll say FinTech Australia. No, look, I'd have to echo what's been said so far. It's very easy to make the mistake, I think, of going to a new market, planting a flag and going all in. There are a lot of free resources out there. Austrade, FinTech Australia, there are FinTech associations in every market that you can leverage that are all willing to help. And using that data has been incredibly helpful. Building a network, going in market first with partnerships, and then following up with commercial teams has been pretty helpful for us.
I think it's really interesting to hear the theme coming through this, that it's partly about accessing opportunities, but also the management of risk, not making the bad decision, not wasting the time from whatever resources people are drawing. So that's really interesting. Do we have any hands up from, does anyone want to ask a question? So I've got one down here.
What do you guys consider to be the number one?
Oh, the mic's off, I think.
That work?
Oh, good to go.
Good to go? There we go. What's the number one challenge of taking an Aussie early stage company offshore and trying to scale globally?
Number one challenge.
If you had to pick the number one.
What's the number one challenge taking an Aussie fintech offshore?
Taking Aussie fintech offshore. I personally, I don't think Australians moving the fintechs offshore has always worked well. It's a challenge. I think it's a cultural challenge, number one. And I think that if you look at history, where people have made mistakes is taking the existing team and trying to grow it remotely. I would echo what was mentioned in the previous panel here, and that is having local resources on the ground who understand the culture, can speak the language at business grade is very, very important. So that's number one, having the right people. And number two is not underestimating the change of regulation. If I look at Southeast Asia, 10 markets, 10 regulators, it's not easy. And having that structural platform correct goes a long way, because if you go into the market, get it wrong, rebuilding it is a very difficult task.
I think I'd support that. So although Miko got first traction overseas, the development team was here. And that's quite hard. So you've got sales and marketing over in Belgium and the development being done here, and then working out at what point in time to bring developers on locally. And now we all say, oh, we've got this great follow the sun model, but it wasn't like that in the beginning. It was very different. It was, where is that sun? So I think getting that right and learning about how you grow the team locally. And we find that banking customers, they want engineers locally as well. So how do you then create sprints and cycles where you've got two sets of developers has probably been the hardest challenge.
Time zone. Doing things from here, I'm kind of tired of getting up at 5 a.m. and doing calls with people. Yeah, I know, and so you're having your coffee and they're wishing that they were heading to the bar. So yeah, look, that's been kind of the challenge on an interactive basis, is just getting the heartbeat and the communication with them that works. We've done some sort of trips with our proposed partner in North America. It just, you make so much traction when you're on the ground. They generally like people who talk funny, so we get along all right. But the relationship you build in person just has been the real key, working with partners and also potential investors over there. So it's been being in person. I think back to your point and to the point from the previous panel, people are hard, right? So getting the right people and the right fit for our culture on the ground over there that understand the local language, local culture, local custom has been the challenge, and we were really particular about that process. I wasn't really a people person, but we now have an HR group. We do onboarding. It's great, but it's really important. It's something I completely underestimated at the beginning, and kind of, if they were personable, I'd go, that's great. But there's so much more to it, and it's the key to success. People are the key.
I think you're a people person. Go on.
Sometimes.
Any other hands up from the room? I've got a suspicious-looking gentleman over here.
Yeah, really interesting panel. Just interested in the views of the panel on Australia's brand, particularly around Australian fintechs, and whether that has been of any use to you in terms of credibility and reputation or otherwise, or if not?
I'll go first. I think the brand equity is growing. I don't think it was there probably 5 or 6 years ago, but we're seeing more international investors deploying funds to Australian fintechs. A good example is Immutable, very large investment this year from Intersekt from Singapore, which was, I think, a great outcome, right? And a big sort of sign of approval of what's happening in this market. So I think it's definitely heading in the right direction. It's not easy, actually, for foreign investors investing into Australia. I don't think the government makes it incredibly easy at all with levels of approval that's required, but I think it's getting a lot better than it was several years ago.
Yeah, I'll kind of add that I think it works quite well for us. Our environment from a regulatory point of view is mature, and the ability for us to operate and prove that we can do things in this market with the right level of addressing risk and sustainability, it makes sense. Then when we went to North America, and we've also done some exploratory work in the UK, it feels similar, and people can identify with what we do here, and generally with the fact that Australia has a litmus test against what can be done elsewhere. So I think it works quite well, and I also kind of like the fact that when we land, it's not necessarily for us, it hasn't been anyway credentialising Australia's market. That's almost a given. It's how we've operated in the market and how we address the problem over there. I find a little bit more education about specifically our domain and what we're doing in AI. I went to a session the other night on quantum computing, which now I know a lot more than I did before. But Australia is a hub for that knowledge for everywhere in the world. And I think for some of the work we've done in AI, some of the work that's been done in an innovative sense to bring new solutions to market, I think it's respect. I think there is a respect for the brand, if you like it. I'm a New Zealander, so I can say that, right?
So I'm a Brit, so I can say something. I think just in terms of Miko's focus, Australia is known to have very well developed digital payments infrastructure, high smartphone adoption, so strong consumer uptake of innovation. So I think that carries something of a brand. So you're not coming from a country that is, steeped in checks, and so I think that really helps. I do think though that there is still this thing of it's a long way away, and we do meet that in Europe. So and you have to back that up by breaking down those barriers and putting people locally. But yeah, brand strong from consumer adoption and tech, but still a long way away.
So I'll wrap up with one last question for the panel. And noting that we're all together again for the first time at Intersekt in a while, business is really different than it was 3 years ago. I think international business is really different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So for you, what do you think? What would you say is the difference you most observe? And maybe start with you, Gordon.
Yeah, so I guess it's quite a personal view. We've been able to do 2 incredibly large projects completely remotely. I think it's unlocked the ability for us to be here and deliver anywhere, which is fantastic. The thing that's still a challenge, and we were talking about this before, is it's just the personal relationship. It's a lot harder to build remotely. So I think we're getting back to doing it. It's great to see everyone here, and it's really noisy out there. There's a wall of sound, and that's because people are able to kind of interact and talk. So I see that it will break down, and we'll see a bit more travel. But I think the delivery side and kind of the logistics of being successful remotely is definitely unlocked for us anyway.
I agree with that. I think pre-COVID, online meetings felt a bit stilted, and now there are lots of memes about you're on mute, but it's not awkward anymore. And I think we've all met people first time online and know them for years, only having known them online, and I think that really helps with remote servicing, and it means you can put a lot of effort into a market before you take the expensive decision to put people on the ground. So I think that's really helped.
Yeah, I'd agree that we did a very large M&A exclusively on Zoom during COVID, which is incredibly difficult and would never recommend it to anyone ever again. But it's good that Intersekt is back on and we're meeting people face to face. I think we have a challenge, like many people do, to get people back to the office, and that's hard, but very important to ensure that the culture remains. But I think they're the two differences.
So fantastic. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panel for today.
Thank you.